Shana Tova. It's always nice to hear your eulogy while you're still standing. No pressure. Oh, wow, I can hear that. Okay, good. Shana Tova, everybody. First of all, I want to thank the community for having me. I want to thank Rabbi Spitz for sharing the bima with me on his final high holidays. It's really gracious of you to let me be a part of this, and I appreciate that. And I'm excited to work together both this month, and even though you're going to be not in the office after September, I'm sure, I mean, you're already on my speed dial. So I look forward to talking to you and heeding your sage advice. I know that in the schedule, the sermon's not supposed to start till 10:30, which means I have an extra half hour to talk. So that's great. I'll do my best. I was thinking about the high holidays, and I was thinking about what I wanted to say to this community. And I flashed back on a memory I had from high school. I remember the nurse's office in my high school, and it had this poster on it. And it was a beautiful woman, and she was standing there, full face to the camera, and she had a cigarette in her mouth. And on one side, she was made up, her makeup was beautiful, she looked absolutely pristine and perfect. And on the other side, there was black tar creeping up all over her face. I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but it was, the tagline was, if what happens inside your lungs happened outside, would smoking be seen as so cool? And I thought it was a great metaphor for our health, right? We have both spiritual and physical health. They're interdependent. What's going on inside we may not be able to see, just like we can't see tar building up in our lungs, but it's there. We can't feel physically at our best when we're in a spiritual crisis, and we can't be everything we want to be spiritually when we're in pain physically. We've seen over these past 18 months that the toll one takes on the other. When you take away one, it damages the other. The rabbis had this idea that there was some sort of competition between soul and body, but actually they work in cooperation. As Rabbi Spitz said, we're here as a community. Some of us are physically here in the building, others outside on the Jumbotron, which I think is going to, you said a Dodger game later, right, Phyllis? And still more are watching at home. We've had to completely redefine what it means to be a community. We've been forced to discover what it means to be physically there for each other, even when we're socially distanced. Socially distanced, but not spiritually or emotionally distanced, emotionally closer. We've made space between us, but our closeness is not about physical proximity. It's about a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on. These are the hallmarks of a sanctuary, not the walls around us. A sanctuary, a place that it means we are safe. Safe to be ourselves no matter what we're experiencing in that moment, good or bad. I've been a rabbi now for over a decade, and I've worked in Jewish nonprofits for over 20 years. Wow, okay, 20 years. Over the course of that time, I've had a lot of different jobs, and I've tried to figure out for myself what is one thing that united all of the work I've done. Is there one specific mission or calling that led me to teach Hebrew school, work as a USY advisor and a youth director, and ultimately end up in the rabbinate? In the end, I think there really is. I think in all the jobs I've ever had, I've seen myself as an advocate for the soul. It's my job to find and help somebody find and nourish the spark within them, the spark that makes us who we are at our very core. There's no doubt in my mind that we have a soul. I feel stronger about this than I do about what God might be. There's a part of us that's more than the collection of our biology. Science has shown us how the processes in our body work. Psychology has shown us why we do certain things, why we're motivated to make the same mistakes over and over. But there's another part of us, a part that's greater than a collection of programmed responses. With all due deference to Sam Harris, we do have free will. We're able to overcome our brain chemistry and choose a different path. It's hard to recognize our souls. It's hard to know when we're tapping into our true core, but it exists. It's the thing that makes us who we are. Not our relationships, not any exterior definitions. It's what makes me Ben. It's what makes you you. If you think about it, you actually know you have a soul. If you've ever experienced a moment of love, of bliss, of true happiness, then you've had your soul touched. You've been moved. So what is the soul? Imagine, if you will, a pearl. Okay? How is a pearl made? A pearl is formed by a deposit in the tissue of an oyster or a mollusk. It's a piece of dirt that just sits there in a shell. And over time, that nothingness, that piece of dirt, becomes something perfect. A perfectly circular white object of blazing purity. Our soul is that place inside of us, born of the dust of the earth, just like Adam, our forefather. Just like him, we contain this breath of God inside of us, this pearl that shines from within us. Our souls are purity and divinity personified. A speck of divine energy covered by human imperfection and almost walled off. Think about where a pearl lives. It's closed off in a shell at the bottom of the sea. And we do the same thing with our souls. We close it off with defense mechanisms and sarcasm and cynicism. I mean, we're Jews. That's kind of what we do. And it's at the bottom. And it's up to us to reach down to the depths of ourselves, to open up that bivalve and share our soul with other human beings. It's the place where we are divine. It's shlemut, wholeness and holiness, and the seat of our ability to achieve perfection. We have moments of it. And it's not all good, in air quotes. Even those parts of us that we consider less than perfect, as Carl Jung would call them, our shadow selves, they're a part of our soul as well. Those parts of us that we don't love, maybe I'm going to pick a totally random example, not based on my life, but our temper maybe. Even that is part of our soul. And when we get angry at ourselves, when we beat ourselves up or we beat our chests literally or physically for doing something wrong, we're missing an opportunity. When we beat ourselves up for being part of our shadow selves, for having those, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to learn from them because they're a part of our soul as well. Because our soul is perfect. It's our conscience, our creativity, and our truth. If we act from our soul, nothing will go wrong. Now, that doesn't mean that everything will work out. It's not the same thing. Acting from our soul won't save us from sorrow or magically make everybody else kinder or more compassionate. Acting from our soul doesn't turn the 405 into a garden of angels. But our reaction does. The outcome does not negate the truth of acting from our soul. Just as doing mitzvot does not protect us from pain and suffering, we know that good people suffer. Allowing our soul to guide us will not be a magical balm. There may be times when we act in a caring, compassionate way, and someone else acts from a place of selfishness or fear. But if we're guided by our soul, we can see that in the other person. We cannot concentrate on the fact that we took our armor off, and we can focus on the hurt that that person's experiencing. But we hide our souls. We hide what we see as ugly or unfortunate. Over the course of my career, I've had a lot of great opportunities, and one of my favorite things that I did was when I was a rabbi in New Jersey. I was a rabbi in New Jersey for 6 years. It felt like 20, and if you've been to New Jersey, you know why. But I taught, sorry, Phyllis. But by the way, you're here now, so you kind of know what I'm talking about. Every Thursday morning, I used to teach a Parshat HaShavua class. And the crowd I would get was largely retirees. And I would show up and let them schmooze for a little while, and then I would start the class. And while they were schmoozing every week, I would hear, oh, my this, or my that, or this is suffering. And I'll never forget this beautiful woman, Ann Farber was her name, Zichrona Livracha. She would always turn to me when everybody was kvetching about their ailments, and she said, Rabbi, I know, you didn't come here for an organ recital. And I thought that was such a brilliant line. I loved it. But all of the time that they were complaining about this physical piece or that, one thing they never brought up. They never brought up how they were doing mentally. It's only the rare, brave soul who's open with their struggles with mental illness. Even though we've come very far, there's still a stigma around mental illness. There continues to be a perception that struggles with depression, addiction, obsessive and compulsive disorder, that they're a matter of choice or bad parenting. They're no more a matter of choice than the person who has cancer. These high holidays, we have a unique opportunity. It's the union between the spiritual and physical parts of our being. We spend time in prayer and contemplation, and then on Yom Kippur, our reflection takes a physical form as well. We don't eat for 25 hours. We deprive ourselves physically. We attempt to demonstrate to God and to ourselves that in spite of the fact that our souls are housed in flesh, that we can transcend our physical beings and be purely spiritual for a moment. Yom Kippur allows us to be those souls, to be godlike in those moments. On these holidays, we acknowledge the fact that our being is not just one element. It's neither purely physical nor spiritual. They weave together to create the totality of us. We are body, we are mind, we are souls. This place, this sanctuary, is just that, a place. Sanctuary is where we feel safe. It's where we feel safe physically and mentally. One of my favorite stories from the Talmud is a story that I'm sure the rabbis in the room know. It's from the tractate Brachot. It tells the story of Rabbi Yochanan, who went to visit his friend Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar is sitting in the ground in the darkness and crying. And Rabbi Yochanan comes in, and it says, the Talmud tells us, just when he walks in, his presence brought light into the room. Rabbi Yochanan walked in, and he sat on the ground with his friend, and he asked why he was crying. Rabbi Elazar looked back and said, I'm weeping on account of this beauty that's going to rot in the earth. A little bit morbid. But think about that. Just the presence of his friend took away the darkness for a moment. Rabbi Yochanan nodded to his friend and said, it's okay to cry. And they both wept. When we're confronted with someone's sorrow, sometimes we don't know what to say. We want to take away their pain, and we can't. Those Shiva calls that we make, those, if you've ever heard this, if you've gone through something, well, I thought you wanted space. No, that's somebody saying, I didn't know what to say. So they both wept. And what Rabbi Yochanan did next is the key to the story. He took Rabbi Elazar's hand, and the Talmud tells us just by taking his hand, Rabbi Elazar was revived. By sharing a touch, a moment of connection. And so the Talmud asks the question, if it was so easy, why didn't he revive himself? And a beautiful poetic answer is given. A captive cannot release themselves from prison. Someone who is suffering mentally or physically needs help. They need help. We need the help of a community, those around us, to release us sometimes from our prison. When someone is suffering, they feel alone. We see from our story that all it takes is for somebody to reach out. And if you're worried, you can Purell before and after. But being there to reach out, whether it's a phone call or a physical touch, it's up to us as a community, not only as a community, but as individuals, to provide the love and friendship that's described in that story. As I mentioned before, I see myself as an advocate for the soul. I see myself becoming a rabbi as the opportunity to work with people on a soul level. Full disclosure, I have never been very good at small talk. I am not good at the kiddish chat. But when someone wants to talk to me about the nature of universe or free will or good and evil, I'm all ears. So because of that, my job is to help people enhance their spark and share it with the world, and I think that's my job here too at CBI. To listen to each person and the community as a whole, to hear what the spiritual needs are, to see how we can meet them as a community. As Rabbi Yochanan taught us, we cannot do it alone. I believe in this holistic approach. I know that psychology and medicine are infinitely important when treating mental illness, when treating our spiritual difficulties. But it's not everything. At times, there's an element missing. While paying so much attention to our medical solutions, we often neglect another aspect of ourselves. We ignore the need of our soul. Religion, the word, as Rabbi Elliot Dorff taught me, comes from the same Latin word as ligament. The purpose of religion is to bind us together to each other and to something greater than ourselves. A spiritual discipline or practice can be a great exercise for our brains. Growing up on the East Coast, when I talk about mindfulness or meditation or anything, I always get the same dismissive thing. You're so California. Well, that may be true, but these new agey places like the New England Journal of Medicine and the Wall Street Journal and New York Times are all showing us how our psychological and spiritual health affects our physical. It's not news to us. We've seen that spiritual dedication can have an amazing effect on our lives. There's a great quote by Rabbi Avraham Isaac Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel. He writes this: "If a person should seek for themselves less than a life oriented toward God, they will at once become like a ship tossed about at sea. If we live just for ourselves, we're missing something." Now, for Rav Kook, it was God with a big G. If this ship tossed about the sea, stormy waves will continually rob them of peace. If he or she should be able to immerse themselves in some preoccupation, they may succeed for a time, and it will seem as they've found peace, but it will not take long, and the spirit will break out of its imprisonment, and the maddening agitation will begin to act in all its fury. What he's describing are the false idols we put in our lives. There's a void sometimes, and we try to fill it with so many different things, with love, with success, with money, with adoration. But it's only through a connection to something larger that we can find peace. I don't think faith in God is the answer to all our prayers, don't get me wrong. It's not the answer to mental and physical illness, but we all need to reach out for something. What Rav Kook is describing is so human, so basic, that its profundity is matched only by its simplicity. We crave connection. For some of us, like Rav Cook, we connect with God. Think about what we've lost this year, this 18 months. We missed out on our connections. Not our social obligations. Some of us loved missing out on those. But our connections. This is the place for those connections. This is the building, the sanctuary, and the community where our souls and our bodies can find their home. Whether it's physically in this building, on a Zoom, or at a park. I had the opportunity to go to the park with a group last Friday for CBI Coastal and to see people, to see the kids running around and running around and running around and running around. It was beautiful. And people got together and there was just such joy, right? Hinei matov. It's so good to be together. Whether we're in the Zoom or the park or here or even in each other's homes in smaller groups, this community is a sanctuary where we're meant to be who we are, where the spark of our soul can join with others. We read just a couple of minutes ago the Misha Berach prayers. When we pray not only for a recovery of body, refuat haguf, but refuat hanefesh, a healing for the soul. We know that when our souls are afflicted, we cannot feel physically healthy. When we're spiritually or mentally sick, we cannot feel well physically. So this is my hope. My hope and my prayer that wherever we are in these next 9 months, we find time this year for ourselves, for our souls. It's my hope that we're blessed to merit inscribing ourselves into the book of life. That next year, maybe not in Jerusalem, but maybe next year here, that we make time for prayer and for each other, that we nourish our souls as we do our bodies. This is a community. And the difference between a community or a tribe or a club or a group is that in those places, a club is where you try to fit in, and a community is where you're embraced for who you are. That's my hope this year for CBI, that we connect to each other, whether socially distanced or not, and that we connect to something greater than ourselves. Shana Tova.